The scream echoed through the sterile corridors of the laboratory, reverberating off the cold white walls. My eyes, fixed on the screen of the electron microscope, could hardly believe their eyes. There, in the depths of the human DNA I had been studying for years, was the proof that would change everything we thought we knew about our origins. My name is Dr. Marcus Vaughan, molecular geneticist. And on that night in 1989, my life and the history of humanity changed forever. It all started 6 months ago when I received a cryptic phone call. A deep, anxious voice on the other end of the line offered me access to DNA samples classified by the government. The man Sati, who identified himself only as Shadow, claimed that these samples contained secrets that could shake the foundations of modern science. I should have hung up. I should have ignored that absurd proposal. But scientific curiosity has always been my curse. The samples arrived in an armored suitcase, delivered by a courier who disappeared into the shadows as soon as I signed for them. Inside were carefully labeled test tubes and a handwritten note. The truth is in the code. Decipher it and free humanity. I spent weeks analyzing that genetic material, comparing it with known databases. Nothing made sense. The sequences were familiar and at the same time completely alien. It was as if someone had taken human DNA and remixed it with something not human. It was on a stormy night, when everyone had already left the lab, that the revelation hit me like a thunderbolt. I was looking at a specific segment of the genetic code when I noticed a pattern. It wasn't random. It was a message. With my heart racing, I began to decode it. Letter by letter, word by word, a terrible truth emerged from the molecular depths. We are not what we think we are. Our reptilian creators hide among us. My mind spun. Reptilians, creators. It was crazy. It had to be. But the evidence was there, encoded in our own DNA. Sequences that didn't belong to any known terrestrial species, perfectly integrated into the human genome. As I struggled to process this information, I heard a noise behind me. I turned sharply, only to see a shadow moving quickly across the laboratory door. Someone was watching me. Panic seized me. I knew too much. I had discovered a secret that should remain hidden. With trembling hands, I began frantically copying the data onto an external hard disk. I needed to preserve this information at all costs. I had barely finished the transfer when the lights in the lab flickered on and off. In the dark, I heard footsteps approaching. They weren't human footsteps. They were heavy, dragging, as if whoever was taking them wasn't used to walking on two legs. I grabbed the hard disk and hid behind a large centrifuge. My heart was pounding so hard that I feared it might give me away. Footsteps stopped near my desk. I heard the sound of papers being shuffled and equipment being moved. Then a hissing voice cut through the silence. "Where are you? Dr. Vaughan. We know what you've discovered. You can't hide the truth from us. After all, we are the truth." At that moment, I understood that my life as I knew it was over. The knowledge I now possessed was both a blessing and a curse. I had to survive. I had to tell the world. But how could I fight a conspiracy that had existed for millennia, encoded in our very essence? With one swift movement, I jumped out of my hiding place and ran for the emergency exit. Behind me, I heard screams and the sound of pursuit. As I stumbled down the stairs, clutching the precious disk with the evidence, I swore to myself that I wouldn't rest until I exposed the truth. I emerged into the rainy night, running as I had never run before. The streets were deserted, but I could feel eyes watching me from every shadow, every dark alley. Were they all part of this alien conspiracy? How many of us were really human? As I ran through the sleeping city, one thing became clear. The search for the truth had only just begun, and I, Marcus Vaughan, was now the guardian of a secret that could rewrite human history, if I lived long enough to tell it. The rain fell mercilessly as I ran through the dark streets of Washington, D.C., the hard disk pressed against my chest as if it were my most precious possession. And at that moment, it really was. My pursuers seemed to have disappeared, but I knew that didn't mean they were far away. After hours of wandering aimlessly, I found refuge in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The receptionist didn't even raise an eyebrow when I paid in cash and asked for a room at the back. As soon as I locked the door behind me, I collapsed on the bed, exhausted and terrified. But I couldn't rest. Not yet. With trembling hands, I turned on the laptop I had bought on the way and inserted the hard disk. I needed to better understand what I had discovered before they found me. Hours passed as I delved deeper and deeper into the data. What I found disturbed me even more. It wasn't just traces of alien DNA in our genetic code. It was an elaborate project. Genetic manipulation on a global scale going back thousands of years. The Reptilians, as I called them for lack of a better term, were not recent invaders. They had been here since the beginning, guiding our evolution, shaping our society. The old legends about serpent gods and shape-shifting creatures began to make terrible sense. As I analyzed the data, a memory surfaced, sharp and frightening. I remembered a conversation I'd had with my mentor, Dr. Alan Blackwell, weeks before receiving the mysterious samples. He had mentioned a secret government project, something to do with the alternative origins of humanity. At the time, I thought it was just another one of his eccentric theories. Now I realized that Alan probably knew more than he let on. He might be my only chance of fully understanding what was going on and perhaps of surviving. With a heavy heart, I picked up the phone in the bedroom and dialed Alan's number. After several rings, a sleepy voice answered. "Alan, it's me, Marcus. I need your help. It's about the project you mentioned, about our origins." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Alan spoke again, his voice was filled with fear and resignation. "Oh, Marcus, what have you done? Do they know you found out?" "Yes," I replied, my throat tight. "They tried to catch me in the lab." "Alan, it's all true, isn't it? About the Reptilians, about them creating us." Another heavy sigh. "Now it's much worse than you think, Marcus. Meet me tomorrow at noon in the Botanical Gardens. Come alone and be careful. They're everywhere." The call ended abruptly, leaving me with even more questions. I spent the rest of the night in a state of paranoid alert, watching the shadows and startling myself with every noise. When the sun finally rose, I was up and ready to go. I stowed the hard drive in a secret compartment of my backpack and headed out, blending in with the Washington morning crowd. The Botanical Garden was quiet when I arrived, occasional tourists wandering among the exotic exhibits. I found Alan sitting on a secluded bench, his face pale and tense. "Marcus," he murmured as I approached. "Sit down. We don't have much time." As soon as I sat down, Alan began to speak in a low, urgent voice. "What you've discovered is just the tip of the iceberg. The Reptilians aren't just our creators, they're our masters. They have infiltrated every level of human society, governments, corporations, religions. It's all part of a bigger plan." My mind spun with the implications. "But why, Alan? What is their goal?" Alan's eyes narrowed, looking around cautiously before answering. "Resources, Marcus. Earth is rich in something they desperately need. We're just livestock to them, bred and kept for a specific purpose." I felt my stomach turn at the revelation. Before I could ask any more questions, Alan grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "Listen, we don't have much time. There's a resistance group, humans who know the truth. They can help you expose all this. Look for..." Suddenly, Alan stopped talking, his eyes widening in horror. I followed his gaze and saw 3 men in suits approaching quickly, their hands moving inside their coats. "Run, Marcus," Alan shouted, pushing me away. "Find the resistance. The truth must be revealed." I didn't have time to hesitate. I launched myself into the crowd of tourists, hearing shouts and the sound of heavy footsteps behind me. As I ran out of the garden, I heard a sound that chilled me to the bone. A high-pitched, inhuman scream, followed by a deafening thud. Alan had sacrificed himself to give me a chance. Now it was my responsibility to use that chance to expose the truth, no matter what the cost. With tears in my eyes and a heavy heart, I plunged into the streets of Washington, determined to find the resistance and uncover the conspiracy that threatened not only our freedom, but our very humanity. Alan's words echoed in my mind as I snuck through the dark alleys of Washington. "Find the resistance," he said. But how? Who could I trust when seemingly anyone could be a reptilian in disguise? After hours of wandering aimlessly, exhausted and paranoid, I found refuge in a public library. I sat in a secluded corner, pretending to read a book as I watched each person who entered, looking for signs that it might be them. It was then that I noticed something strange. A middle-aged woman, apparently ordinary, was carrying a bag with a peculiar symbol, an inverted triangle with an eye in the center. The same symbol I'd seen encoded in one of the DNA sequences I had analyzed. My heart raced. Was it a coincidence or a sign? I decided to take a chance. I approached her cautiously and whispered, "The truth is in the code." The woman froze, her eyes widening for a moment before narrowing with suspicion. "Who are you?" she hissed. "My name is Marcus Vaughn. I'm a geneticist, and I've discovered something about our true origins. I need your help." She studied me for a long moment before nodding almost imperceptibly. "Follow me, and don't look back." We left the library and walked for almost an hour, turning around and around to throw off possible followers. Finally, we arrived at an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. The woman, who introduced herself as Sarah, led me through a maze of corridors until we came to a reinforced steel door. She typed in a code and the door opened with a hiss, revealing a hidden high-tech bunker. "Welcome to the Resistance, Dr. Vaughn," Sarah said, as we entered a room full of state-of-the-art computers and scientific equipment. Several people turned to look at us, their eyes full of curiosity and caution. A tall, gray-haired man approached, extending his hand. "I'm Dr. Richard Hawthorne. We've heard rumors about your findings, Dr. Vaughn. It seems you finally got the evidence we've been looking for decades." I took the hard disk out of my backpack and handed it to him with trembling hands. "It's all here. Reptilian DNA integrated into the human genome. Evidence of large-scale genetic manipulation. But what do we do now? How do we fight against something so vast?" Richard smiled sadly. "With knowledge, Dr. Vaughn, and with this." He pointed to a strange machine in the corner of the room. It looked like a mixture of a medical scanner and a particle accelerator. "This is our secret weapon, a device capable of detecting the reptilian genetic signature, even through their human disguise. With your findings, we can finally calibrate it correctly." While Richard and his team worked on the data, Sarah explained more about the Resistance. They were a group of scientists, military and civilians, who had discovered the truth over the years. Some, like her, were descendants of ancient lineages who had always known about the existence of the Reptilians. "They've been among us for millennia, Marcus," Sarah explained, "controlling governments, starting wars, shaping our society for their own ends. But there have always been those who have resisted, who have kept the truth for future generations." Suddenly, an alarm sounded. Computer screens flashed, showing images from security cameras. Figures in tactical suits were approaching the building. "They've found us," Richard shouted. "Quick, to the emergency exit." Chaos ensued. People were running around, collecting equipment and data. Richard grabbed the hard disk and the detection device, shoving them into my arms. "You need to take this, Marcus. It's our only hope. There's a secure base in the west. Sarah will take you there." Before I could protest, Sarah dragged me into a tunnel hidden behind a bookcase. We heard explosions and screams behind us as we ran through the underground passage. We emerged into a dark alley where a car was waiting for us. Sarah started the engine and sped off through the city streets, while I looked back, heartbroken at the thought of those left behind. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Montana," Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on the road. "We have a facility in the Rocky Mountains. There we can continue the work and plan our next move." As we left Washington behind, my mind spun with everything I had learned. The truth was more terrible and more vast than I could ever have imagined, but now I was no longer alone. There were others who knew the truth, who were fighting this hidden threat. I looked down at the detection device in my lap, a mixture of hope and fear stirring in my chest. This could be the key to exposing the Reptilians, to freeing humanity from their secret control. But the road ahead would be perilous, and I knew that many more sacrifices would be required before we could achieve victory. As the sun set over the horizon, turning the sky into a sea of fire, I made a silent promise. For Alan, for Richard and all the others who had risked everything for the truth, I would keep fighting. Humanity deserved to know its true history, and I would do everything in my power to ensure that this truth came to light, no matter the cost. The drive to Montana was a blur of endless highways, quick stops at shady gas stations, and nervous glances over shoulders. Sarah drove tirelessly, her eyes constantly scanning the rearview mirrors for pursuers. We reached the Rocky Mountains after 3 exhausting days. The resistance base was hidden in an old abandoned mine, its exterior camouflaged to look like nothing more than another rocky hillside. As soon as we entered, I was introduced to the rest of the team, ex-military, hackers, renegade scientists, all united by a common purpose to expose the truth about the Reptilians and free humanity. Dr. Elena Petrova, a Russian biochemist, examined the data I brought with a mixture of fascination and horror. "This changes everything, Dr. Vaughn," she said, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Genetic manipulation is much deeper than we imagined." I spent the next few days working tirelessly with Elena and the rest of the team, analyzing the reptilian DNA and perfecting the detection device. Each new discovery left me more disturbed. "Look at this," Elena pointed to a DNA sequence on the screen. "This part of the code not only allows them to disguise themselves as humans, it also gives them superhuman abilities, strength, speed, longevity. That's why they've been able to maintain control for so long," I muttered, the reality of the situation weighing heavily on me. One night, while everyone was asleep, I was woken up by a strange noise. I left my makeshift room and followed the sound to the main laboratory. There, I found Sarah leaning over the detection device, fiddling with its internal components. "Sarah, what are you doing?" She turned around, startled, her eyes wide with fear. "Marcus, I can explain." Before she could say anything else, the device in her hands emitted a high-pitched beep. A hologram appeared in the air between us, showing a 3D representation of DNA. Half of it was human, the other half reptilian. The blood froze in my veins. "Sarah, you..." Tears streamed down her face. "Yes, Marcus, I'm a hybrid, half human, half reptilian." My mind was spinning. All my instincts screamed at me to run, to alert the others. But something stopped me, the desperation in Sarah's eyes, the pain in her voice. "Please," she begged, "let me explain." Over the next few moments, Sarah told me a story that challenged everything I thought I knew. She was the product of an experiment, an attempt to create a bridge between the two species. Raised in secret, she grew up unaware of her true nature until she was a teenager. "When I found out the truth, I was horrified," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "But then I realized I could use it, I could infiltrate it, learn its secrets, and use that knowledge to help humanity." As she spoke, I began to see the pieces fall into place. How she always seemed to know where to go, how to avoid the Reptilians' traps. It wasn't just luck or skill, it was insider knowledge. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, still cautious. Sarah sighed deeply. "Because the device is almost ready, and when it is, it will detect me too. I needed you to know the truth before it happened, so that you understand. Not all reptilians or hybrids are your enemies." I was silent for a long moment, processing everything. Finally, I made a decision. "What do you need from me?" The relief on Sarah's face was palpable. Together, we spent the rest of the night modifying the device, making sure it could differentiate between those who were a threat and those who, like Sarah, were on our side. When the sun rose, we called a meeting with the whole team. Sarah's revelation was met with shock, suspicion, and, eventually, cautious acceptance. Her willingness to submit to tests and share crucial information about reptilian operations helped gain the group's trust. With Sarah's new knowledge and the improved device, we began to plan our next move. It wouldn't be enough just to expose the existence of the Reptilians. We needed to dismantle their power structure, expose the world leaders who were Reptilians in disguise. There's a G20 meeting in Geneva next week, Sarah informed us. Almost half of the leaders attending are Reptilians. If we can expose them there, in front of cameras all over the world. The plan was bold, dangerous, and probably suicidal. But it was our best chance of revealing the truth to the world. As we prepared for the most important mission of our lives, I couldn't help but reflect on how my worldview had changed. The line between friend and foe, human and alien, had become blurred. The truth, I realized, was far more complex than I could ever have imagined. I looked over at Sarah, who was busy preparing equipment. She met my gaze and smiled hesitantly. I smiled back, feeling a mixture of fear and hope. Tomorrow, we would leave for Geneva. Tomorrow, we would change the course of human history. And for the first time since this crazy journey began, I felt that we had a real chance of winning. The air in Geneva was charged with tension when our team arrived. The city was buzzing with G20 activity, black-suited security guards and dark glass limousines everywhere. For passers-by, it was just another meeting of world leaders. For us, it was the stage for a battle for the future of humanity. Our base of operations was a rented apartment overlooking Lake Geneva. Elena and I spent hours finalizing the detection device, now miniaturized and disguised as an ordinary smartphone. Sarah, using her contacts and insider knowledge, had secured credentials to sneak us into the event as part of the press team. The night before the conference, I gathered everyone together for a final briefing. The plan was simple in theory, but incredibly dangerous in practice. Sarah and I would enter the conference venue, using the device to identify the reptilian leaders. Elena and the support team would monitor from our base, ready to broadcast the evidence live to the world as soon as we gave the signal. "Remember," I said, looking at every tense face in the room, "once we start, there will be no turning back. The Reptilians will do anything to stop us. If anything goes wrong, nothing will go wrong." Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. "We'll manage," I nodded, grateful for her confidence, even if I didn't fully share it. The morning of the conference came all too quickly. Sarah and I dressed as journalists, the detection device safe in my pocket. As we walked to the convention center, I couldn't help but marvel at how normal everything was. People going to work, tourists taking photos. No one knew that the fate of humanity would be decided today. We passed through security without any problems, our fake credentials working perfectly. Once inside, I discreetly activated the device. Immediately, little red dots appeared on the screen, indicating the presence of reptilian DNA. "There," Sarah whispered, indicating with a slight movement of her head. The British Prime Minister was walking past us, surrounded by aides. The device flashed bright red. We moved around the room, documenting each reptilian leader we came across. The President of the United States, the German Chancellor, the Japanese Prime Minister. The list grew, confirming our worst suspicions. We were about to give the signal for Elena to start the broadcast when something went wrong. One of the security guards looked directly at us, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. He put his hand to his ear, whispering something into his communicator. "We've been discovered," Sarah hissed. "We have to act now." Without a second thought, I ran to the main stage, where the world leaders were gathering for the official photo. Sarah shouted after me, but there was no time to hesitate. I jumped onto the stage, raising the device. "Look," I shouted, my voice echoing through the suddenly silent hall. "These aren't your real leaders. They're aliens, reptilians disguised as humans." Chaos erupted. Security guards ran towards me, but were interrupted by Sarah, who appeared out of nowhere, using her superhuman strength to keep them at bay. The leaders on stage reacted in different ways. Some looked confused, others furious, but some began to change. Before everyone's horrified eyes, the skin of the President of the United States began to flake. his eyes becoming reptilian slits. The British Prime Minister hissed, a forked tongue appearing between his lips. The TV cameras, which were broadcasting live to the whole world, caught it all. I heard cries of horror and disbelief from the crowd of journalists. "Elena, now!" I shouted into my hidden communicator. Instantly, the giant screens around the hall flashed, showing the evidence we had collected. DNA sequences, footage of reptilian metamorphosis, secret documents, all on display for the world to see. But our victory was short-lived. An inhuman roar cut through the air, and I saw the German Chancellor, now fully transformed into his reptilian form, advancing towards me. Sarah jumped between us, engaging the creature in hand-to-hand combat. "Run, Marcus!" she shouted. "Finish the transmission!" I hesitated for a moment, reluctant to leave her, but I knew she was right. I ran out of the hall, closely followed by human and reptilian security guards. The corridors of the convention center became a maze of pursuit and escape. I used the device to avoid the reptilians, but they seemed to be everywhere. Finally, I reached the roof of the building. The escape helicopter that Elena had prepared was there, its propellers already spinning. But between me and freedom stood a figure that made me freeze. "Hello, Dr. Vaughan," said Dr. Alan Blackwell, my former mentor who I thought was dead. His eyes glowed with an alien light. "Did you really think you could stop us?" As I stared in shock, Alan began to transform, his human form giving way to a reptilian monstrosity. He advanced, his claws extended. Time seemed to freeze as I stared at the reptilian form of Dr. Alan Blackwell, my former mentor and now my worst nightmare. His scales glistened in the light of the setting sun, his reptilian eyes fixed on me with a predatory intensity. "Wise, Alan?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why betray us like that?" A cold smile spread across Alan's scaly face. "Betray? Oh, Marcus, you still don't understand. We don't betray anyone. We're humanity's guardians, not its conquerors." He took a step forward, his claws clicking on the concrete of the roof. "Think, Marcus. With all your brilliance, haven't you ever wondered why, if we're so powerful, we simply don't take over the earth by force?" My mind was spinning, looking for a way out, a weapon, anything. But a part of me couldn't help but listen, wanting to understand. "You created us," I said, the pieces falling into place in my mind. "You shaped us." "Exactly," Alan exclaimed, his eyes shining with an emotion I couldn't decipher. "We elevated you from the primitive beasts you were. We gave you intelligence, civilization, purpose, all to prepare you." "What for?" I asked, my heart hammering in my chest. Alan's reply was interrupted by a deafening roar from the sky. We looked up and saw the impossible, a huge alien ship hovering over Geneva, its shape obliterating the sun. "For this," Alan said softly, "the real threat. The enemy that is coming to destroy not just humanity, but all of us." At that moment, I realized the true scale of what we were up against. The reptilians weren't the real enemy. They were guardians, preparing humanity for an intergalactic war that was about to begin. A deafening bang shook the building. I saw energy beams shooting from the ship, hitting points all over the city. Chaos ensued in the streets below, screams of panic echoing everywhere. "Now do you understand, Marcus?" Alan shouted above the noise. "That's why we needed secrecy, control, to prepare the Earth for this moment." Before I could reply, the roof door opened violently. Sarah emerged, bloodied but on her feet, her eyes widening as she saw the scene before her. "Marcus!" she shouted, running towards me. Alan turned, ready to attack, but I was quicker. Years of research and discoveries culminated in this moment of clarity. I activated the detection device, but not to expose Alan. Instead, I used it to send a signal, a frequency I had discovered buried deep in the reptilian DNA. Alan froze, his body trembling. For a moment, I thought I had made a terrible mistake. Then, slowly, he began to change back into his human form. What have you done?" he asked, his voice a mixture of astonishment and respect. "I activated the dormant code in your DNA," I explained, hardly believing my own words. "The code that unites humans and reptilians." We're more alike than we are different, Alan. And now, we need to be united. At that moment, something shifted in the air. The frequency I had activated spread, echoing throughout Geneva and beyond. Everywhere, reptilians in disguise revealed their true forms, not with violence, but with a new understanding. Zara came up to us, staring in amazement at Alan's transformation. "You did it," she whispered. "You broke through the barriers." A tremor shook the building again, reminding us of the imminent threat above. Alan stood up, his eyes now showing a mixture of his reptilian intelligence and human compassion. "You're right, Marcus," he said. "The time has come for us to join forces. Humans, reptilians, hybrids, we're all Earthlings now. In the next few moments, we made decisions that would change the course of history. Using reptilian technology and human ingenuity, we began to organize a global defense against the invaders. The battle that ensued was beyond anything Earth had ever witnessed. Cities were destroyed, millions were lost. But for the first time in history, humanity was truly united. Side by side with our former reptilian enemies, we fought not only for survival, but for the right to determine our own destiny. Months passed. The war was long and brutal. But finally, we managed to repel the invaders. The scars on our planet were deep, but the bond forged between species was even deeper. As I watched Geneva being rebuilt, with humans and reptilians working side by side, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of hope and apprehension for the future. We had survived, yes, but at a terrible cost. And we knew that this was only the beginning. Sarah joined me, her hand finding mine. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. I looked at her, at the rebuilding city, and finally at the sky, no longer a symbol of threat, but of infinite possibilities. "I'm thinking," I said, "that humanity's true journey is just beginning. The sun set over the new Earth, a world where old divisions had been broken down and new alliances forged. A world that, for the first time in its long and secret history, was truly united and ready to face whatever the universe had in store for us. The truth about our DNA, about our origin, was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter in the saga of life on Earth. And I, Dr. Marcus Vaughan, together with Sarah, Alan, and everyone else, were ready to write that new chapter together."